So I'm with Sarah Paulson at one of these hideous hotel rooms at the
freezing.
TCAs.
Yes, freezing hotel room.
With some hot water in your
Yes,
hand.
I'm clutching some hot water.
So I want to know if you think that on some level, because I found it to be a big surprise having watched the actual trial at the time, there was a romance in this story. Or do you consider it to be a romance?
I consider it more to, and I don't know if this is going to sound incredibly, there's a word that's eluding me, just wrong, for lack of an articulate way of putting it. It was more like a bromance to me, because it was really about what I always thought. I mean, I have my theories, and I've said that before, and I have no problem talking about my theories, but in terms of anything that we know to be completely and utterly accurate, the only people that can really speak to that would be Chris and Marcia, and neither one of them ever have. So there's a very intense, yes, something. There was an almost moment that Chris did not close, that I think in that moment Marcia was ready to receive. But
they're work colleagues.
They were work colleagues, and what they really were people in the field together and in the trenches, and were fighting a particular kind of battle, and were experiencing something that, unless you were there, would not be anything that would translate or hold or have. I don't even know there'd be any way to really properly express what that was like for them, except for to each other. And I think that was incredibly bonding and rare. They really used each other. They leaned on each other. They needed each other's brains. And beyond that, I sure would like to think something happened definitively, but, until she says it herself or he says it, I just am going to go along with, I sure hope so.
Did you ever ask Marcia Clark?
I did not ask Marcia Clark, and I was tempted to ask Marcia Clark, but it felt disrespectful, and I felt if she had wanted to talk about that in a very direct way, she would have.
Because the jurors
thought
they picked up on it.
Yeah. Look, I have my own theories. I think that there was probably some sort of romance there, but I'm not sure that it was entirely, for my money, I think it was predicated chiefly on what at the task at hand, and that it bonded them in a particular way, and they cleaved to each other in a particular way.
And anybody who works together, there's always an element of attraction.
Of course.
Across the sexes. It happens
Sure.
all the time, a flirtation that doesn't
Sure.
necessarily turn into anything.
There's no bottom there. It doesn't mean that it's growing roots. It just means that there's something that keeps you kind of bright to the other one.
Exactly.
And that is...
So when, I understand they cast Sterling before anyone knew whether there was chemistry between the two of you.
That is right. I was in New York. I can't remember what I was doing there, but I couldn't get back to LA. And I got a call saying, can you come in tomorrow? We want to do a chemistry test with you and the guy we want to cast as Darden. And I, of course, felt total and utter abject terror at the thought of it, because I had only read the first two. I hadn't really begun in earnest any of my intense research. So I thought the last thing I wanted to do was put myself in a situation of doing a chemistry read where I look really bad because I'm not prepared. And, he's obviously been working on the material and reading it and is clearly the choice. There's always that thing when you get offered a part where you really fear walking onto set and having everyone go, oops. Something really wonderful about auditioning for something and earning it, and knowing that when you walk on that set, you were the one that was chosen. You're being hired based on your previous work or your relationship with a creator or showrunner, or their faith or belief in you doesn't always translate into you actually being able to execute it well. So it's always nice. I always like having that feeling of knowing I earned it. And so I thought, God, this person's going to have been working on it and be really, really ready, and I'm going to seem really, really bad. That's not why it didn't happen, but I was very relieved when I got the call saying, you know what, if you can't get on a flight by this time tonight, and it was very, very last minute, and so, but I think we would have had the chemistry that we ended up having. We probably would have had it on that day.
Well,
I like to think.
says it was instantaneous.
I think it was instantaneous. I think, what it really was like an actor to actor chemistry that lent itself very, very, very wonderfully to the material, because we both work very much the same way. We're incredibly focused. Not a lot of chatting in between, except for if we're doing something that's a light day or there is something, which there weren't many of those days where there wasn't something enormous at stake. But there were a couple of times where we would just shoot the breeze. But mostly we were both so focused, either our nose in a book or in an iPad watching footage and throwing it underneath the desk right before they called action. And we were both doing that without discussing, hey, what are you doing and why are you doing that? And so I think there was an immediate kinship that we felt just based on the way we approached our work. And I think we both thought, oh, how great, I don't have to explain myself or apologize. I mean, there was a scene in episode 9 where, I think it's 9, it might be 7. I've yet to watch them, so forgive me if I can't tell you exactly what they were, but he gets very, very angry with me in the elevator about Furman. And he screams at me and throws his briefcase down. And I remember on that day that we shot, he did not speak to me for the entire day until that scene was over. And it was because we had such an ease and such a respect and such a love for each other. And by this point, whether it was 7 or 9, we were towards the end of the thing. So a lot had transpired between us, both personally and professionally, doing the thing. And so he couldn't have his normal light self with me. He couldn't, he was very, very angry. Chris was very, very angry at Marcia, and he needed to not let anything permeate that for him. He needed it to stay strong. And the minute he was done with that scene, he said, I was just, and I said, I know. But it was that perfect example of, with another actor, you might have to come up and say, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to go deep for a minute and I'll be back with you in our normal way when we're done. But he didn't have to tell. I knew exactly why he was doing it. And that was a perfect example of the unspoken between us.
Now, you've worked with Ryan Murphy, you've worked on any number of shows. You are a pro. You know how to do this stuff. What was different this time on this show that permitted you and the others, obviously, to do some of your best work?
I have thought about that a lot, actually, because I don't know why. I mean, as you say, I have been on a lot of shows, and I have been doing this for 20 years. So why now? It's not that I haven't been working in ways that have been pleasing me or working in ways that people have noticed. That has happened, but there's something about this that feels elevated in terms of awareness or kudos, if that's the right word, or anyway. The only thing I wonder is if, and I really have thought about this, I think I do best when I have an incredibly clear blueprint to build the house from. Writing, fact-based story. When I am left to my own devices in my imagination singularly, I can think of, it used to be this way when I was a child. I remember taking tests in school that were multiple choice, and I would finish very, very quickly, and I remember the teacher saying, you didn't, and I would say to them, I don't understand these multiple choice. I know you're supposed to pick the most right, but 3 out of 4 of them are all totally viable. And so I don't understand, it's asking too much of my brain to pick. My mind sort of could see how all different avenues could get you to the same place. And sometimes in my work, when I'm creating something out of whole cloth or with the script, but it's all invented, story and character, I end up having too many things to choose from, and sometimes I get unsure as to which one to commit to. And unless I'm working with an incredibly strong director who knows exactly what he wants, they too are kind of like, try this or try that, and that kind of thing, that kind of freedom is not helpful for me. And I didn't know this until doing People versus OJ. And I think because I had so much reading to do and so much I could actually watch of her physical behavior, and then I could spend time watching it again and see if I could pick up something that she wasn't intending to put forward, and all of that kind of research, and it makes my very, very overactive mind was a little bit quieter, and I could just focus on the task at hand. And it helped that I was playing a person who was incredibly focused and determined and sure. That kind of certainty can be a very, very galvanizing, very energizing. It can create a tremendous amount of velocity in a performance, I think.
But it was her undoing.
It was indeed. So, but like any great character, and I always feel funny calling this a character because she's a real person. But sometimes it is our greatest strengths that become that are actually the mirror up. They are the weakness or the thing that can get you.
She was almost too smart for her own good.
Yes, and her commitment.
Faith in other people's intelligence.
Yes, and I think really the truth is her commitment, her fundamental belief that the facts do not lie and that the evidence does not lie. She couldn't get out from under that understanding that she just felt if she put, I know that truck is really annoying. Well, we're sitting right by the kitchen, I think. So there's like lots of food going in. Yeah,
trucks.
Someone's going to eat a really nice meal soon. It's not us, but someone's going to get some food. I think that she really did believe this was more evidence, even Tubin talks about in his book, than almost any case ever. You sometimes can have a case, and often, where you're lucky to find a fiber, a hair, a drop of blood. The volume of evidence was so enormous that she just kept thinking, if I put the evidence in front of the jury, there's no way you can deny. There's just no way. And so she wasn't able to let that part go, whereas the defense was able to bring in a whole circus tricks that were very useful.
But this series was also defined perhaps by a different movie level standard of writing and directing, and I wondered what it was like too to work with these directors and how different they were.
It was really great because there were really 4 of them, and Singleton was the only one who did
Just
single one.
A good one.
A good one, and there was something very, very comforting about knowing that there were just a few of them, and so they were all on board telling the same story. There was the same style. Sometimes you do episodic television and you have a director coming in wanting to put their stamp on something that already exists in a particular way, and it's very confusing, and if you've been doing the show for a long time, you end up feeling like, that's just not what we do here, but it's hard. So it was very, and Anthony Hemingway actually was one of my first TV series was called American Gothic, and he was the second AD. And it was my first job, and I was 19, turning 20, when we did the pilot. And so I've known him since then, and we had obviously not been in a great amount of contact between then and now, but when I saw him, and there he was saying action to me, and there he was coming up to me with an idea for me to play, and it was just on Emmy morning, actually, it was one of those weepy moments when we were texting each other just with like crying emojis.
Oh
yes, it was one of those very exciting things. But for him in particular, because I had known him since we were both children, it felt like and it was his first nomination, I believe.
So it was also sort of shot like a movie.
It was.
In that kind of, as if it were this 10-hour movie, not in continuity.
Well, there was a big part of me where every time I kept thinking we were just going to be shooting this forever. I thought we were just never going to be done with it. I kept thinking, we'll be doing this next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. It had that kind of feeling where it just seemed like it would never be over, and it was shot like a movie. And I give a lot of credit to Nelson, our very brilliant cinematographer. And I will tell you one thing, it's the only time I've ever been on film in any capacity without having any light on my face ever. The entire thing was shot with source lighting. So like, when we were in the courtroom, all you had above us was the grid of lights, the fluorescent lights that were in. And Nelson within the courtroom, the lighting was built to, serve what he had planned for the show. But I never had a bounce card in my face. I never had a light in my face. I never had, not once, except for the moment when Sterling almost kisses. When Chris almost kisses Marcia, Nelson's like, let's give her a tiny highlight. Just a tiny highlight. And I was like, gee, thanks. We're like episode 7? And as a woman over 40, playing a woman, it's a scary thing to think about, not having any help, any movie magic to sort of soften things.
Poor
Marcia. Yeah, she sure didn't. So I embraced it, believe me. I did go out on national television wearing that wig and with those under-eye circles painted under my eyes and all of that.
Well, it strikes me that the Marcia episode especially reveals what so many, I must imagine you identified with her to a great degree because she was so exposed. And it's something that actors have to deal with.
Yeah, and I don't think I'd ever been, I'm not one of those actors who's ever been labeled one of anything in terms of like a sex symbol, the girl next door, this. I've never sort of had to walk around with that kind of label attached to me. So it wasn't, I've never had to sort of come up against that in such a way that if I tried to do something else, people were going, you can't do that, you're this. And, so I've been lucky that way. But I've talked about this before. Almost every TV show I've ever done where I played a leading lady, they wanted me to have long blonde hair. And I may have auditioned as a brunette and gotten the job on the strength of whatever it was that they decided they wanted for the character. But in terms of how I looked, I had to change it, And that's a sort of disquieting thing to think about, You sort of go, gosh, I guess the way I was naturally came into the world is not attractive enough, is not appealing enough, alluring enough, something enough, I mean, Marcia did tell me a story about walking out of the courtroom on any given day where court people who were covering the case would just run after her with lipstick and concealer and just say, please, it would just for you, it'd be for your benefit. It's,
Wow.
and she just would always say, get out of here, and which, if you really think about it, is kind of
Unusual.
unusual attitude to have about